Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. This is Masechet Zevachim, and today is our 13th class where we're going to be reviewing Daf 87 through 93. I want to wish everyone a Chanukah Sameach. Hope everyone is having a wonderful Chag. Okay, Daf 87 speaks about things that we were talking about, things that are placed on the Mizbeach, on the altar, and then if they kind of burst off the altar again, because there's a fire and it's being burnt up, there is a danger that things can go off or be thrown off of the altar. The question is, when do you return the items onto the Mizbeach and when you do not return the items onto the Mizbeach? So if the meat has been on the altar, on the Mizbeach, but not on the fire overnight, so you don't take it off, but if it does come off, do you return it or not? So the Gemara tells us that there's no concept of lina. Lina is where things are left overnight and become invalidated in the temple. But if something is left on the mizbeach, on the altar, that is considered. It's not considered as left over, and it does not become invalidated. The Gemara teaches us that not only the Mizbeach itself, the altar, but also the ramp, and also the vessels, the Kli Sharet, the sanctified vessels as well. These vessels sanctify things, even if they are invalid, and allows them to be put onto the Mizbeach, or maybe not, and that is a machloket. The Gemara discusses the airspace above the altar, above the Mizbeach. Does it sanctify things as if they were placed on the altar, or not? Again, is it similar to the airspace of the ramp, which does not sanctify things, or is it different? So another question that the Gemara has is, if things are connected to each other, if one part is placed on the Mizbeach, all of the parts, because they're connected, become sanctified. Okay, let's say now the Gemara talks about when you do the process for the bird offering, right? When we do milika, it's over, right, in the airspace of the mizbeach. So that animal should already be sanctified. And then how could we ever have a case where it becomes disqualified? So the Gemara says, well, if you did milika, and as you were doing it, you said, I'm going to take this off the mizbeach and burn it tomorrow. So that is invalidating the sacrifice, and therefore, that's how you can construct the case. Daf 88 tells us that, again, the bird offering, as soon as it's in the airspace, maybe not on the Mizbeach, but again, maybe the airspace isn't like the altar itself. The Gemara says no, because with the bird offering, you touch the bird to the Mizbeach, to the altar, and therefore it becomes sanctified. And then the Gemara explains about the airspace. If you are at the top of the Mizbeach, everybody agrees that the airspace is considered like the Mizbeach, but if you're standing on the ground, so and then you suspend something above, so then that is where we're not sure if it would become sanctified or not. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 88 tells us that vessels of liquids sanctify liquids, and vessels of dry things sanctify dry things, but not the opposite. Uh, and a kli kodesh, a sanctified vessel, if it has a hole in it, so if it can continue to do the same job, so then it still sanctifies objects that are inside it. If not, if it leaks, so then it would not be okay. And it must be in the temple courtyard for it to sanctify the things inside of it. Okay, so now the Gemara explains that the mizrak was a basin. This sanctifies anything because it was used for dry and for liquid things, and therefore it sanctifies both. But right, we talk about the mincha, right, the green offering. It's wet because it has oil, but it's made out of flour, so it's also dry. So the Gemara tells us that that is considered dry and not wet. The verse teaches that the vessel needs to be complete, full, and it only sanctifies what's inside the vessel. And if it's heaped, meaning over the edge, that is not included. Or another opinion is that it is included in the sanctification. If you put part of the sacrifice inside and then intended to put in more, then each part as it goes in becomes sanctified. Let's say you put dry into a liquid, you cannot bring it as a korban, but you also can't take it out of the courtyard because it has been sanctified up to a certain level. We mentioned that the vessel cannot have a hole in it. Again, if it's leaking. If it does have a hole in it, we do not repair the vessels in the Beit HaMikdash because that's a sign of poverty. And therefore, because the temple is seen as a palace, you get a new, if it's something that gets worn out or old, you get a new vessel. You do not repair the old ones. So too with a knife. There's also a conversation about the clothing of the Kohen that is woven. We don't wash it very strongly with lye, or maybe it can be cleaned. And we'll actually talk about that later on today. If it actually needs real cleaning, so then that's already, you get a new clothing, and you do not use the old one. The Gemara, since we're talking about the clothing of the Kohanim, the me'il, the coat of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, is all tchelet, and on the bottom you have little rimonim, little pomegranates that were woven out of the blue, the purple, and the red threads, and they look like little hats. And then there are 72 bells that hang off the bottom of the me'il. Or another opinion is there are 36 bells that are hanging off the bottom. Since we're talking about the clothing, the Gemara tells us that the clothing of the Kohanim are mentioned with the sacrifices because both of them come to atone for sins. And from here, the Gemara talks about what each type of clothing that the Kohanim are wearing, what they atone for. So the tunic atones for bloodshed, and the pants for indecent relations, and the hat is for haughtiness, because again, the hat is high. So if you think you're so high, it will atone for that. The belt is for thoughts of the heart. The choshen, the best breastplate, is for justice. The ephod, which is an apron, is against idolatry, and as we said, and the me'il, the coat, is against lashon hara, right? Because the me'il, the coat, makes noise when they walk, and lashon hara, right? Slander or speaking about others makes noise. The tzitz, right? The headband or the piece of gold that the Kohen Gadol wore on his um, forehead, it atones for brazenness. Okay, that is the end of the 9th chapter, and now we're going to begin and end the 10th chapter in Masechet Zevachim. So, Daf 89, the chapter begins. The Mishnah tells us, and this is a very famous concept, anything that is more frequent is done first. Excuse me. This is the concept of tadir. Tadir means frequent. Something that is done frequent is done first. And basically what we're going to talk about is, if you have a number of sacrifices in front of you, which one do you do first and which one do you do second? So the tamid, the daily korban, was done before the musaf. Musaf was the addition on certain days. Then that's done before the musaf of Shabbat is done before Rosh Chodesh. This is something that for those of you who are familiar, this Shabbat is actually Chanukah and Shabbat, obviously, and Rosh Chodesh. And for many people, it becomes very exciting because we take out 3 Torahs. And of course, the question is, what do you read first? And we are going to implement this idea. Whatever is more frequent is done first. So first Shabbat, then Rosh Chodesh, then Chanukah. So yes, it's going to be actually a long day in shul, but for the halachists out there, it is an exciting day. So it is literally about this. This is the parak. This is the Mishnah. So again, the Musaf of Shabbat comes before the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh comes before Rosh Hashanah. And this is based on a verse. So now the Gemara explains, maybe only the Tamid comes first, but not other frequent things. The Gemara says, no, the verse teaches us that anything that is more frequent will come first. Okay, the next Mishnah is going to teach us, again, not something that contradicts this, but we're going to put them against each other in a little bit. But anything that's holier than the other is going to precede it. And therefore, the blood of a chatat, of a sin offering, is placed on the mizbeach before the blood of an olah, of a burnt offering, because if it atones, it is holier, which I think is fascinating. The limbs of the burnt offering of the olah come before the innards of a sin offering, because the olah, the burnt offering, is completely burnt, therefore it is holier. A chatat comes before an asham, again, sin offering before a guilt offering, because the sin offering, the blood is placed on 4 corners as opposed to 2 corners. The asham comes before the nazir, because the asham is sanctified, it's kodshe kadshim, as opposed to the nazir, right? The nazir and the todah come before shlamim. Shlamim are the peace offering, because the Todah and the Nazir are eaten only for one day, as opposed to Shlamim, which is 2 days. So one day is seen as holier. The Shlamim comes before the Bechor, the firstborn animal, because again, the Shlamim gets placed on 4 walls, and you lean on it, you do smicha, and it comes with libations, and it goes to the Kohanim. The Bechor, the firstborn, comes before Maaser, because, again, it is more sanctified. Maaser comes before a bird offering, because an animal, meaning a behema, a how do you say it, right? A sheep, a goat, is seen as more holy, than a bird offering. Because again, an animal offering has blood and the innards go onto the mizbeach, as opposed to the birds, do not. They just have blood. The birds come before a grain offering, before the mincha, because again, because there is blood, for the bird, it is seen as holier. The mincha of a sinner, comes before the mincha, than any other mincha, because again, it atones. As we said, atonement will come first. And the chatat ha'of, the bird sin offering, comes before olat ha'of, the bird burnt offering, because again, atonement before anything else. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. The verse teaches that sometimes the chatat goes first and sometimes it's second. The chatat of the Levi'im is like an olah, but it still comes first. Again, this is based on the verse. And again, the blood of the chatat comes before the blood of the olah, but the limbs of the olah come before the innards, the emurim of the chatat. Again, the limbs are seen as holier than the innards of the sin offering. We said, what about the blood of the olah, of the burnt offering, against the blood of the asham, the guilt offering? So we said chatat is first, but not asham, or maybe it is. So one opinion is that maybe the asham comes before the olah, or no, that is not the case. As we said, the chatat, maybe the asham should go first. We say no, because the chatat has more blood on the mizbeach, and therefore it goes first. Things that are eaten quicker or in a shorter amount of time are seen as more holy. If you have a todah versus the ram of the nazir, the todah, you have 4 types of loaves, of bread or of like of grain, but the nazir has 2 types of loaves. So therefore, the todah wins with 4 loaves. The shlamim is more holy, because there are more actions that surround it. The bechor is more holy, the firstborn animal, because it is holy or sanctified from birth. As we said, all animals come before birds, but birds, even though birds are kodshe kachim, meaning they are the highest level, we still say that the animal sacrifices are more holy. Okay, meat of Kodshe Kalim, which is the lower level of sacrifices, the meat of those sacrifices that went out of the courtyard before you put the blood on the altar, this would still be valid, or no, maybe it's not valid because the meat went out of the temple area. Okay, there's a machloket if the innards of the kodshe kalim, again the lower level sacrifices, if they went out, they are seen as again invalid, or maybe if you bring them back, they might be valid, meaning even if they went outside, they would still be valid. So Daf 90 tells us that the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves that are brought on Shavuot, if they are outside when the sheep are being sacrificed, so then that would be problematic, because or maybe not, because they're not really part of the same sacrifice. They just come together. We then said the birds come before the grain offering, the mincha. Again, because we have private and public, and then we say no, blood is still going to be holier, and therefore the birds come first. Okay, then the Gemara talks about different grain offerings. There is the sinner's grain offering, the minchat choteh, that does not have oil, but it is holier of all the minachot because it atones for a sin. The minchat sotah, if you remember the sotah, who is a woman who is suspected of adultery, she brings a grain offering. This is not for atonement, it's only to clarify what is actually going on, versus a voluntary grain offering. Again, a voluntary grain offering will be made out of wheat. The sotaz is made out of barley. Therefore, the voluntary mincha should be first. We say no, the choteh versus the sotah. The sin one comes first, and a voluntary grain offering does come with oil, whereas the sotah does not have oil and is made out of barley, therefore it comes last. Okay, we said that the bird sin offering, the chatat ha'of, comes before chatat ha'olah, the bird burnt offering. This is based on a verse, because the olah, the burnt offering, is going to come second with animals, or maybe also with birds. Okay, let's say, okay, hold on one second. Okay, now let's talk about animals. So the Gemara says, let's look at animals. So bulls should come before rams, which come before lambs, which come before goats. Each one of these, the bigger the animal, the bigger the libations that are brought with it, the wine and the grain. Therefore, the bigger they are, the earlier they come. And the ox of the Kohen Gadol comes before the par helem davar that we learned. This is the ox when the nation sins, and that comes before the ox of idolatry, which comes before the goat of idolatry. So if you notice, we have 3 different criteria. One is frequency, one is sanctity, and one is the type of animal. So in each case, we're going to measure which one of these variables we are looking at. Okay, one second. Okay. Okay, so that is, so then the Gemara says, again, the type of korban comes first. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah on Daf 90. The Chatat, we said, comes before the Asham, except for the Asham Mitzorah. This is the leper who is going to bring 3 different korbanot. The first one he brings is the Asham, because that is going to help him be able to bring the other sacrifices. Okay, hold on one second. okay, the asham, the guilt offering, the animal is 2 years old and worth 2 silver shekel, whereas the asham nazir and the asham mitzorah are 1 year old and not worth 2 shekels. So even though they're both called asham, there is a distinction of which one should go first. All sacrifices that are sacrificed earlier are eaten earlier. So therefore, let's say you have the shlamim, right? The peace offering of yesterday. Again, it was sacrificed yesterday and the meat is still around. This is eaten before today's shlamim, right? Before today's korban. Shlamim of yesterday is eaten before the chatat and asham of today. Now remember, we said chatat is number one, but we're going to say that the sacrifice of yesterday trumps even the more important sacrifice of today. Or no, the chatat is always first because it is kodshei. So those are two different opinions. All the meat of korbanot can be eaten in any way, meaning roasted or cooked. You can add spices. Those spices can be chulin, meaning mundane, regular spices, or they can be truma spices, or no, another opinion is you cannot use truma spices because it's going to lead to a disqualification of this truma. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain, again, frequency versus holiness. Which one comes first? Remember, we said the more frequent one goes first. We said the holier one goes first. But what if I have the holy one versus the frequent one? Which one comes first, right? So again, we said the tamid comes before the musaf. That seems to imply frequency over holiness. Now, you might say maybe the musaf is more holy because, again, it's a special korban. The Gemara says no, because Shabbat makes the tamid just as holy. Therefore, this is not a proof. Daf 91 continues. The Musaf of Shabbat comes before the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Again, proves frequency. But maybe Rosh Chodesh gives it more sanctity, therefore maybe it is sanctity. Musaf of Rosh Chodesh comes before Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Again, frequency over holiness. No, Rosh Hashanah gives holiness to both of those sacrifices, and therefore we do not have a proof. We try again. Kiddush, if you remember in Masechet Brachot, we have a whole discussion about the bracha over wine, also in Shabbat, In Shabbat, we talk about Kiddush. What bracha do we make first? Do we make the bracha over the wine, or do we make the bracha over the day, meaning Shabbat, right? So we say wine comes first because it is more frequent. Or we can say, no, Shabbat gives it sanctity as well, and that is why it comes first. If a person didn't say musaf, and now it's time for mincha, first you say mincha, and then you say musaf, again, because of frequency. However, so here the Gemara says, this proves frequency trumps kedusha, and therefore frequency wins. Okay, we said that the shlamim of yesterday come before the chatat and asham of today. If it was on the same day, obviously the chatat would be first because of frequency. The Gemara says, no, it's not frequency, it's matsui. Matsui means that it's brought often, but it's not like it's scheduled to be more frequent, meaning the most korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash seem to have been a sin offering, a chatat, but it's not scheduled, right? Meaning Shabbat comes every 7 days. That's something that's scheduled. A sin offering is not scheduled. Therefore, it has nothing to do with frequency. Pesach isn't tadir, but milah, right, or frequent, but milah, brit milah, is frequent. But again, these things are not scheduled. So we say there is a concept called tadir b'mitzvot, right, consistent or frequent in mitzvot. Or maybe we'll just say that Brit Milah is done more often than Pesach, right? Because babies are born throughout the whole year. Okay. If you slaughter the not tadir, the not frequent sacrifice, so now what do? Do you continue with the wrong sacrifice, or do you stop and put it aside and go back and do the one that you should have done? So the Gemara says that if you have a chatat that was not shechted, the shlamim comes first, but not right. But maybe not if it wasn't shechted already. Sorry. We cannot learn from kiddush. Remember, again, we have the bracha on the wine and the bracha on the day, because those come at the same time. Therefore, we cannot learn from this. If you shecht, if you slaughter the Pesach before the Tamid, right, before the daily sacrifice, so then what do? You stir the blood of the Pesach, and then you first do the Tamid, and then you go back to the Pesach. Or maybe that's only if it was already slaughtered. Then you put the first aside and you do the second one. Okay, the next Mishnah tells us, if you see oil being given out in the temple courtyard, you can assume that it's left over from a grain offering, from a mincha, or from a mitzorah, from the leper who had to bring a lot of oil. You can assume that it was not donated. We're going to see that there's a machloket if you can donate oil to the Beit HaMikdash. If you're putting oil on the mizbeach, on the altar, so let's say, again, it's left over from the mincha of the Kohen. Again, you cannot donate oil, or maybe you can donate oil, right? Two different opinions. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Akiva says that wine can be donated, and it gets poured into the bowls on the mizbeach, at the top of the mizbeach, and oil that is donated is put on the fire. So maybe all of it, or maybe only some of it, and the rest of the oil is given to the Kohanim, right? Just like the mincha, you put a little bit of the mincha, the kometz, the handful, onto the fire, and the rest is given to the Kohanim. Or maybe you learn oil from wine, and you put all of it on the mizbeach. So now the Gemara explains, if you donate wine, you pour it on the fire. It is a fire offering, but wait a minute, it might extinguish the fire, and we know you're not allowed to extinguish the fire. It's okay because it's only extinguishing a little bit, and therefore it is okay. And then the Gemara talks about taking off either a coal or some of the ash. You have to be careful that you don't extinguish the fire. And the Gemara discusses something that we learned in Masechet Shabbat, which is what we call davar she'eino mitkaven. You do an action, but you didn't intend for the outcome of that, right? So if I want to put wine on the fire, it's because I want to put wine on the fire, not because I'm trying to put out the fire. So Rabbi Yehuda says davar she'eino mitkaven is still a it's forbidden, and therefore you put the wine in the bowl. But Rabbi Shimon says it's allowed, and therefore the wine can go on the fire, even if it extinguishes part of the fire. Okay, the top of Daf 92 says, again, a similar related idea. Melacha she'ina tzricha legufa. If you do, this is specifically in Shabbat, if you do an action, but you don't really need the result of that action. Again, if you don't need the result, Rabbi Shimon says that it's okay. So again, you could put out a fire if it's dangerous, because you're not putting out the fire to make coal. You just want to save people from damage. Okay, and with that, we end the 10th chapter. Okay, moving right along to the 11th chapter. So this chapter is based on the verse that teaches us that if the blood of a chatat, of a sin offering, gets sprinkled or spritzed or lands on the clothing of the Kohen, it must be laundered out of the cloth. Here we're talking from the perspective of the blood. We're not talking about the perspective of the Kohen wearing clean clothes. We're talking about the fact that the blood cannot be absorbed by something else. It needs to be removed. So too, if a chatat was cooked in an earthenware vessel, then the earthenware vessel needs to be broken. Again, just before you get upset about that, recognize that earthenware is seen as disposable, right? Because what do? You just break it, you grind it up, you start again, you make a new vessel. So it's not seen as a terrible loss. If the utensil is metal, it needs to be washed out. Just as an aside, if you're interested in archaeology, they discovered the site of the tabernacle of the Mishkan in Shiloh, because in all the mountains around it, they found a ton of broken earthenware vessels. And this is really what we just learned, that if you're eating sanctified meat and it's cooked in an earthenware vessel, you need to break that vessel. So that was a way that they identified where Shiloh is. Okay, so let's do the Mishnah. Blood of the chatat must be washed out. The word is kibus, laundered. The verse is speaking about a regular chatat, but it also includes the internal chatat, the one that goes inside. But an invalid chatat, an invalid sin offering, if it sprinkles, you do not need to wash the clothing, whether or not it had a moment of validity, what's called sha'at hakosher. If there was, even if there was a sha'at hakosher, even though it was valid at some point, if at this point it is invalid, you do not need to wash out the clothing. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain. The word Torat, right? These are the laws, adds, it comes to include. Zot, this comes to exclude. So what are we excluding? We are excluding the bird sin offering, the chatata of, that if it gets its blood sprinkles on the clothing, you do not need to wash out that blood. It is not shechted. Again, it's not slaughtered. It is malikad. I don't know what the word is in English. Decapitated, maybe. Okay, so it includes another animal sacrifice. Again, it includes the inner chatat, but it excludes the bird chatat. Okay, so here the Gemara is discussing what happens if the chatata of, again, the bird sin offering, if it was brought into the sanctuary, the heichal, is the blood seen as invalid? Again, it is in the actual bird. The question is the bird seen as a vessel, a kli sharet, and therefore it sanctified the blood already? Or no, it is not sanctified and therefore it would still be valid. Um, what if the blood of the bird spilled on the floor of the courtyard? Can you collect it and would it still be valid? But again, it was a bird offering is not placed into a kli sharet, into a sanctified vessel, and therefore it is not sanctified, and therefore if it's spilled from the bird, maybe it would be invalid and you could not pick it up. What if the blood of a chatata off is in the airspace of the clothing? Then it already became invalidated, and therefore it would never need to be washed. So we say no, the clothing actually touches the bird. There was never any airspace, and then that would not be the case. What if the chatata of's blood spilled onto one cloth or clothing, and then from there onto another one? Does the second clothing need to be washed? The Gemara says yes, because either it was valid, it was a kli sharet, and therefore it is valid, and therefore it needs to be washed. Okay, last daf 93. What if the blood sprinkled onto an impure clothing, right? Tameh clothing. Do you need to wash it or not? So if the blood was kosher and then it became invalid and then went onto the clothing, then for sure you do not need to wash the clothing. But what if it happened at the same exact time? So we say maybe we can learn from the water, the mechatat, the water with the ashes of the para aduma that became impure. It still makes a person pure, because you can sprinkle a woman who's in nida, a woman who is impure in and of herself, even though she is impure. You can. You can still sprinkle, but the Gemara says maybe this is different than our case with the blood. Let's say a sanctified vessel, a kli, passed over an impure place. One opinion is it's as if it stopped along the way and therefore it becomes impure, or no, it stays pure because it did not rest, right? Again, when you pass something over, is it seen as if it is resting or not? Okay. Next, again, if it is already impure, so then again, we say maybe it becomes impure or maybe it is pure. Now, we said that the verse says from its blood, only blood that is from a valid sacrifice needs to be laundered. And if it had a moment of validity, it still needs to be washed, even if now it is invalid, or no, if it is invalid now, you do not need to launder it, and this is based on a verse. Okay, last Mishnah for today. If blood sprinkled from the neck of an animal, or from the altar, or from the base, the yisod, or from the floor, you do not need to launder that clothing. Only blood that was collected in a kli sharet, in a sanctified vessel, and is fit to be sprinkled onto the altar, only that type of blood, if it goes on clothing, it needs to be laundered. So this is, the Gemara says this is based on a verse. Again, it says, Asher yazeh, that you will sprinkle. You need to be able to sprinkle this blood, and it must be in a kli sharet. if you collected blood in two separate vessels and each one has less than the amount, than the shi'ur, the amount that makes it sanctified, so then that blood, if it sprays out, you do not need to launder it because it never became sanctified. The inner chatat, the chatat pnimit. How is it done? Right, the Kohen dips his finger in the blood. You must have a certain amount of blood in the kli, in the vessel, and you have to dip your finger each time that he sprinkles it, right? And this is based on a verse. The leftover blood on the finger is invalid, it's pasul, and if it lands on the clothing, it does not need to be laundered. If this is before sprinkling and it lands on the clothing, then it does need to be laundered. Okay, with that, we are going to end for today. Be'ezrat Hashem, and next week we will pick it up. We will have our regular class, Be'ezrat Hashem, on Wednesday. So we do have a few minutes if anyone has any questions. I see Helen is on. Are you in Australia? No? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of it now, so I hope I'll be able to be clear. It's back on DOF 92A, which was just something new to me to discover. I had not seen this detail before about what they would do with it says the blood, the oil, the minka offering, the wine offering that became tameh, that they would make a separate pile, the Kohen would make a separate pile and burn them. And it mentions that it would be somewhere on the floor. They did not do this on the altar, but they would make this pyre, they would and burn it right there. So I never thought of that. So the question I would have is, do you know if the procedure was they would have to use coals from the altar, though? They couldn't bring in any other kind of fire source, right? So get coal, someone would take a scoop of coals from the altar, come down, make a pyre, then did they add wood to that? I don't know. And would this be all just at one time of the day where they just gathered everything that had become tameh? Or would there be a sensitivity, a rush to isolate that thing right away, take care of it right away? So you could have had multiple pyres going on at once. What do you think?
Great question. I'm not sure. The Gemara does not mention in terms of one or many. I think that they really did try to keep things as tahor, as pure as possible. So I'm not sure how often this would be the case. So, you're talking about when you asked if it's multiple times a day or once a day, I imagine that it didn't happen that often for it to become impure. So my feeling from the Gemara is that it was a once in a while thing. This is what was happening. It's a great question. I'm not sure about the details in terms of how it was done. Again, you don't want to put those things on the altar because that is for pure things. So it is a fascinating question that I'm not exactly sure. So yeah.
And it include the wine in that. How do you burn wine?
Yeah, I think you sprinkle it gently and it's
Okay, a little bit of it. Okay, that makes sense. And the oil
exactly.
too, because that'd make more fire. Just a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there, in that sense, you didn't have to bring wood because you had the oil.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, just never
yeah,
thought of that. That's just
yeah,
it would be unusual, be quite a safety item. Everybody's running around or whatever, and suddenly there's a fire in the middle of the floor you would not normally
right,
have. Don't step on that.
right. Right. Again, I think that definitely when we're talking about tum'ah, they were very careful to keep it contained because everybody's, dealing with pure things. So I imagine it was taken care of immediately so as to not make other things impure.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, wishing everyone a Chanukah Sameach, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we should only hear good news, and we stand with the community of Sydney for the tragedy that happened this week. Really, just such a horrible tragedy. So we are sending love from all across the world and thinking of our fellow Jews. So wishing everyone a Chanukah Sameach and Chodesh Tov and Shabbat Shalom. So I just did the opposite of what we just said today. But I guess we should say Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, and Chanukah Sameach. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Be well.
Thank you.